My wife of nearly 3 years has done unthinkable things. 2 weeks out of D-Day, please help me. 30 male. First, some context. My wife is 25 years old and I'm 30 years old, male, female. We've been married for 3 years and together for almost 6. We have no children, no real assets, more debt than cash in our bank account. We rent a property, and I'm the major breadwinner, bringing home approximately $4K per month. While she brings home around $1.5K, I work my tail hard to give her with the life she's been used to, and now I'm faced with the unimaginable. My work family is fairly close-knit. A colleague I've known for almost 3 years asked me to join a recreational soccer league, which I've been a part of for the last 2 years. My wife would come to every one of my soccer games, which I assumed was a show of support for me. But in the back of my mind, I assumed she was there for the booze. Most nights when I had games, I would drink very little, but she, as a fan, would become very drunk during the games and ride home with me. After the games, a handful of the boys and ladies would gather at various locations to stay out late into the night. We'd come back to my apartment a couple times, or we'd go to a pub, pizza restaurant, or anything. So, a few weeks ago, a bunch of them planned to meet at one of the men residences in a city far distant from me. After the game, I apologized to everyone and informed them that we wouldn't be attending since I had work early the following morning. On the way home, she contacted one of the men I considered a friend and asked him to give her a lift over there. She asked if she could go while I was driving home, and I told her no, since I had work in the morning and wanted to be with you tonight. She gave me the furious alcoholic silent treatment, and when I arrived home, a vehicle drove up in front of the house. It was my friend. I was furious because she had made the executive choice to attend this party. I walked to my buddy's vehicle and told him I wasn't happy with it and that I needed to leave. But then my wife got out of my car and into his. They left in their car. In my wrath, I plugged in the dead iPad I had purchased for her years before. It was old, but I recognized it as being linked to her messaging/social media accounts. I knew precisely where she was and attempted to remain up until 3 a.m. that night, but she was still not home. I awoke the following morning to find her in our bed. I had no idea when she had returned home. I woke up, dressed for work, and went without waking her or kissing her goodbye. The first and only time that had ever occurred. I wanted her to know how angry I was. So, before leaving for work, I grabbed the iPad and stuffed it inside my briefcase. When I arrived at work that day, after a meeting and a few phone calls, I pulled out my iPad and saw it light up with a notice from a messaging app. Friend was texting. I open the app and see a horrifying exchange of messages that are supposed to self-destruct, but this app version must have been outdated, because I was able to witness in real time their conversation, recanting the night before, where Buddy is making references to them making love, and other guys who had fun last night. I was on the verge of losing it, but then it got worse. I watch as my wife tells friend to give her a video of him, which he does, and I regrettably see. I raced out of my office and into the restroom, where I vomited furiously. I was shivering from what I had just observed and asked to be excused from work for the day. After spending many hours to calm myself, I was terrified I was going to injure someone or myself. I returned home to find her still asleep on the bed. I set my belongings down and invite her to come downstairs. I sat across from her and asked her to tell me everything that had transpired the night before. Which she did, but without mentioning any scenarios. It was just drinking, playing pool and chatting. I then inquired as to when she had last spoken with Buddy. She said that she had messaged him briefly that morning, but nothing in particular. Then I delivered the bombshell. Would your tale alter if you knew I listened in on your whole talk with him this morning? She burst into tears, and the first thing that came out of her lips was, "Are you abandoning me?" She come clean and told me she couldn't remember much, but she had with Buddy and another colleague the night before, and that's all she could remember. She may have had with more people, but she couldn't remember. I was appalled. I inquired whether this was the first time, and she surprised me by saying that there had been others, one of which was even in my home while I was asleep upstairs. That was the last straw. I was so numb to it all that I helped her pack a suitcase, and she left the home to see relatives. pleading with me not to tell anybody. I was alone in my nightmare, and I'm now 2 weeks away from D-Day with no clue what to do. I sincerely hope I don't get the award for worst D-Day experience, but it's difficult to imagine anything worse than discovering your wife in a situation with individuals you've invited into your life, only to discover that this has been going on for months with at least one of the guys. Now she wants to blame it all on drinking and claims she'll enter AA, as well as go through couples counseling, since she wants us to get through this together. I suppose it's a bit late, but I'm a chump and I'm experiencing the whole spectrum of pissed feelings, including guilt, for no apparent reason. I have an appointment with an attorney tomorrow. I like to believe I'm making the correct decision, because no matter how distraught she is over being an alcoholic and how badly she wants to work things out, I can't even speak to her without seeing her as lunch meat in a sandwich. I can't trust her. I'm disgusted by her acts, over it again. I deserve a lot more than that, and I'm not perfect. Then why do I feel so guilty? Isn't there no way to reconcile this? I'm not the villain, am I? Any help or words of advice are much welcomed. I feel like a fool putting this all out and seeing it so plainly, but it's not simple to just stop loving for the person who absolutely and utterly surprised you. Please be kind with me. To keep my options open, I arranged a couple meetings with lawyers and one with a legal document preparation person a few days after the first post. FYI, my wife was not aware of those meetings. We went a few days without direct contact after the post, but she was adamant that this time she was going to make an effort to get us in to see a marriage therapist, which I had been insisting on for months before my D-Day, so we could try to see if there was any way of working through this, but I knew in my heart what my choice would inevitably be. She did get us on a therapist's schedule, but it would be approximately a week and a half before we could see him. I was actually tracking her every move from that awful iPad at the moment. I was obsessed with it, watching every message come and go, checking Facebook, Snapchat, and anything else I could think of. I had no additional proof after a week and a half of digitally examining every action she made, and I assumed she was demonstrating genuine sorrow. When it was finally time to meet the therapist, he sat us down, asked why we were there, and I instructed her to give him the tale in her own words. She left out certain specifics, but the most of it was on the table. After hearing everything, the therapist turns to me and says, "What does that make you think about your faith in her? What effect does it have on your marriage?" I just shook my head in astonishment and horror, and instead of responding to his inquiry, I said, "I'm worried I'll never say it aloud if I don't say it now. There is no turning back for me. This marriage is done. My trust has been destroyed, and I believe the only thing left to do is pursue a divorce." My stomach clenched, and she burst into uncontrollable sobbing. "I'm not sure what can be salvaged from this relationship," I said. "But the marriage is ended. I meant what I said at the altar, and I'm not being true to myself if I don't identify this as broken, unfixable." I felt a smidgen of relief at that moment, having announced out loud, in front of her and a neutral person, that I was done. The rest of the therapy meeting was spent on him explaining to her why my sentiments and choices were totally logical given the circumstances, and on her being calmed down. In my perspective, it couldn't have gone any better. He insisted on meeting us individually, first, to see if he could assist us as people, then maybe on the horizon, possibly years from now, bring us together for consideration of reconciliation. I'll say it right now so you don't have to worry. I have no intention of ever contemplating reconciliation at this point, but the individual counseling could genuinely help me in the meanwhile. Before I go any further, I knew I was about to start on a legal road that, if not amiable, might be disgustingly unpleasant and financially disastrous to me, the earner in a no-fault state. I've typed up the whole legal procedure, but I'm leaving it out until everything is finalized. Too dangerous to publish online right now, the overall idea of the legal procedure is that I must maintain things pleasant for the time being. Let's skip forward about a week and a half. We've each had at least one private therapy session by this point, and her story to her whole family is that we're terminating the marriage due to a breach of vows, but we're both working to cure ourselves right now. She's still living with relatives, and I'm still obsessively scanning her social media for any hint that she's continuing her nasty practices, as many of you said she would. I'm not claiming it's your fault. I have looked anyhow, It wasn't until one night last week that I discovered there was a location I'd never looked before the App Store. I checked the app download history of her iCloud account and discovered that she had put a hidden messaging app onto her phone approximately 2 weeks before that evening. My stomach clenched. I realized in one fell swoop that she'd gone out of her way to hide some sort of messaging from me the entire time, knowing I had her iPad, which she insisted on me keeping so I could start trusting her again. But I still believe she didn't realize that an app downloaded on one iCloud device can be seen in the history from any iCloud-connected device. I wanted to know what the conversations were inside that app, since I wasn't even in control of my body recalling those times. I installed the program on her iPad, tested a couple of her most often used login combinations, and voila! The truth. She had not only been contacting Buddy on this app since after our first therapy session together, but they had also been having at times when she knew I'd be out of the region. I threw up. I sobbed. It was 3 a.m. on a weeknight. I entered the bathroom and began gathering all of the prescription drugs I could locate. I returned to my room, clutching an overflowing quantity of tablets that, without a doubt, would have been successful in terminating my life. I sobbed on the side of my bed, ready to end everything. I took out my phone and attempted to contact my mother. There was no response. My father. There is no response. My sister. She responded. I was sobbing uncontrollably as I told her what I'd just found, and she could see I was about to explode. She had no idea I was holding the tablets, but she insisted on keeping me on the phone, even if it was in the middle of the night, until I calmed down. It took about an hour, but I was eventually numb again, and after hanging up the phone, I walked back into the bathroom, placed the pills back into one of the bottles, washed my hands, and went back to bed to attempt to get at least a couple of hours of sleep, which never happened. I realized after a few hours that I needed to go to work. I couldn't take being in that place or experiencing that scene any longer. As I dressed, I tossed the bottle of pills into my briefcase along with the iPad, which I instantly handed to my most trusted employee and requested him to lock up in his desk and not return them to me, no questions asked. As I went away, he offered me a sympathetic touch on the shoulder. So now I've completed the task. I received what I asked for, what I had been looking for, undeniable evidence that my wife is not just a cheater, but also a cold-blooded liar. I battled for days trying to figure out what to do with the knowledge I'd uncovered. On the one hand, I desperately wanted to call her out to every potential family member, friend, or acquaintance and tell the whole world who she actually is, what she had done and was still doing, but I couldn't. I've already started the procedure of dissolving the marriage, but there's still time for her to turn nasty and pricey. As the days passed and my messages, calls, and efforts to speak with her remained unanswered, she eventually went out of her way to check on me. I was on the verge of passing out. I was purposely vague and indifferent to her throughout the interaction since I didn't know what to do. It wasn't until she lost her cool and began ranting at me that I realized what was going on. I gave her a chance and asked her directly, "Have you had any touch with Buddy at all since that night?" Her response, "No. I had him blocked on everything." "Are you sure about that?" I questioned again, and she passionately said that she wasn't, that he was nasty, and that she could never do that to me. Then I dropped the bomb on you. "So, what about this app? And what about this video I captured on my phone of that app, showing the chats you two have been having this whole time, the photographs you've texted each other, the plans you've made to sneak about depending on my daily schedule?" She sank into the ground, weeping, wailing, and pleading with me, for what I had no idea. I kept my tone neutral, so here's what's going to happen. I'm not going to tell anybody about this, and in return, you're not going to fight me about anything related to the divorce. I'm going to be fair, even though I shouldn't have to be, but you're going to get served with divorce papers and then do nothing with them, because otherwise, everyone would know about this scenario and why I'm being so unreasonable. It's your call. She departed, and she was served 2 days later. I've kept my promise and haven't informed anybody outside of my personal family members since that day, but I know for a fact, find my iPhone, that she has visited him every single night since then, at the home where he lives with his mother. Her family believes she attends Alcoholics Anonymous meetings every night, however. Screenshots of her whereabouts during the meetings show otherwise. Seriously, why hasn't she updated her iCloud password? I'm not sure why I keep gathering proof, but I do. I'm struggling right now with the anxiety of waiting for this period of time to pass till her right to challenge me in court expires, all the while knowing her family believes she's on the right track, when that couldn't be farther from the truth. In fact, she's lying to each and every one of them. The unfairness of it all is what bothers me the most right now. She gets to be around people, her family, and act like everything is fine every day, and run away each night to have with him, then sneak home in the middle of the night to keep up appearances, while I go to work every day, come home to an empty, mentally haunting house, and experience what it truly means to be alone, in every sense of the word. I'm past the point of contemplating self-harm, but they are gloomy days nevertheless. I'm taking things hour by hour, day by day, until the day comes when I know I'll make it out of this hell without my finances being decimated, and I'll be able to formally leave her in the dust. I honestly don't know what I'll do next. I'm simply trying to get by till that time arrives.